very much for joining us here on E-Manufacturing Conversations.
Thank you for having me.
A pleasure. So first question, as always, is how did you get here and what do you make?
Well, let's start with what we make at Harvest Bee, and then I'll tell you how I got here. At Harvest Bee, we develop and manufacture plant proteins that are specifically formulated to replicate the texture of meat and form factor. So our end customers are B2B, so food manufacturers, food brands, and food service who want to come up with their own creations to delight and excite consumers with the kinds of plant-based meats that people should have the opportunity to eat. So how did I get here? I have been building and growing companies for over 20 years. As you can probably pick up from my accent, I'm American.
Yeah, you're around here.
That's right, I'm not from around here. So I've spent most of that time in New York City and built a couple of different companies, and always in areas where categories were rapidly transforming. I actually came to Australia in late 2019 through this program called the Global Talent Visa. And it was designed to bring people like me who had worked with different kinds of technologies and had the familiarity of what it takes to establish new technologies and grow those businesses, not only domestically, but internationally. That gave me an opportunity to be a permanent resident here in Australia, which was really exciting. I had just exited my last company, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do next and how I wanted to use my skills. I knew I wanted to do something that was climate positive. And I set out to look at the kinds of opportunities that aligned with where Australia truly had a unique competitive advantage, something that was enduring. And I very quickly connected with agriculture. My roots as a child were actually in Iowa, which has some of the most important agriculture production in all of the United States. So I was very familiar with livestock production, with growing crops. And I remembered that I was about 20 when I realized that all of the corn and the soybeans that were grown in my home state went to livestock feed. None of them were actually for human consumption. And so you extrapolate that over another 20 years, and what's happened as we've grown our consumption of animal protein, which we all love, except for vegans and vegetarians. But the vast majority of consumers really do like animal protein. As we've all seen the statistics of what's happening with the population growth and wealth growth and the desire to have a continued increase in protein consumption, the amount of land use that's required and the inefficiency of growing crops to then feed animals is somewhere around a 15% caloric conversion into humans. It's just an inefficient system to continue to scale for the population sizes that we have. So there's been a lot written about this. We don't need to get into some of those details, but I fundamentally believe we need complementary protein sources to continue to have a food system that will scale with our population. So I looked at the incredible history of agriculture here in Australia, but I also saw we have a tendency to ship raw commodities out of this country without investing in value-added capabilities. So I interviewed probably 75 people across industry, academia, government, and really got to know the industry and identified this opportunity that we're tackling here at Harvest Bee to focus on building in a part of the supply chain where there was a complete lack of innovation here in Australia, but also a lack of innovation globally.
Right. I'm not sure everyone will agree with the assessment of a complete lack of innovation in the plant-based industry in Australia.
In this part of the supply chain.
Okay.
So if you look around at the companies that are doing great work in alternative proteins, you will see lots and lots of people that are downstream from us. So people that are B2C brands that are coming up with new innovative concepts to excite consumers across a wide range of different types of products. You'll also see people that are upstream that are working on how do we extract proteins? How do we work with the farmers for the types of crops that we want to have? But in between those two parts of the supply chain is where we sit at Harvest Bee, which is developing the ingredients.
See, well, everyone needs a niche that is preferably unoccupied, and that's yours. A little bit of info, please, for the benefit of listeners about what goes on here at the Surry Hills kitchen that I'm visiting and what goes on at the Penrith site where you recently had a launch.
So our Penrith site is our pilot facility where we do R&D work as well as commercial production work and share our products out with customers here in Australia. Here in Surry Hills, where we're sitting today, we have a kitchen where we'll bring our customers in to try our products, and then we also have a kitchen lab where we do a lot of the testing and the validation of the products that are coming off of our line out in Penrith. It's really, really important that we not only have R&D and testing capabilities on site at the factory, but that we also come back here and we put it in downstream applications to test its performance.
Could you please go into a little bit more of your origin story? You're a long-time entrepreneur, but I think, unless I'm mistaken, a first-time manufacturer. What's that like? What does it look like to you? Some more context, please.
You know, if you listen to AMGC, the Advanced Manufacturing Growth Center, speak about manufacturing, I really appreciate the way that they have begun to frame manufacturing that I think is a bit of a departure from how we might publicly perceive manufacturing from 20 years ago and how we think of it as today, and it's technology. It's fundamentally a technology business. It might be a hardware business, but it also requires a lot of software. And the software might be specific to the product itself. It might be specific to a number of different software stacks that you need to just run your business, from finance to payroll. So everybody's a technology company today. Food and manufacturing are very different in terms of the fundamentals, but what we're doing here is fundamentally creating a new product that is leveraging multiple technologies to do that. And we are creating something that we have to figure out how to grow over time. So there's a lot of commonalities with other industries that are trying to do the same thing.
Indeed. And speaking about being a technology business, you have data science among your team, do you not?
We don't have a dedicated day-to-day data scientist, but we have done work in that field and actually fundamentally believe that extrusion work, which is a lot of how our products are developed today, has historically been done through intuition, through feel. So a lot of people that I talked to in the field, in the industry, before we founded Harvest Bee, would talk about it as a black art. And the reason they talk about it as a black art is because there's usually one or two people that the operation is highly dependent on, or as you get into operators who are not sufficiently trained, you start getting into a lot of problems with repeatability and consistency of products. The reason why that is because people become intuitive with the raw materials and with the products and can make pretty good judgments over time about how to achieve certain types of products. What we're trying to achieve is a greater degree of sophistication in the outcomes and trying to create textures that actually mimic animal meats. We need to utilize a lot more data in terms of understanding and evaluating our raw materials that are coming in, understanding how different proteins will behave. And that is a long journey in data collection, end to end, from raw materials to finished products to the sensory evaluations, to understand how all these puzzle pieces fit together, to have predictability and consistency at scale as you bring in new staff. That's a data challenge, and that's something we have to invest in more and more over time.
I see data scientists working more and more in manufacturing, even in non-giant companies, and it's nice to get a concrete example of what one might do.
Absolutely.
Why did you choose this part of the value chain rather than making, say, bologneses and burgers for supermarkets?
We were talking a little bit earlier when I made a comment about the lack of innovation in this part of the value chain. Not to say that there's no innovation in alternative proteins in Australia. There's actually quite a lot that is happening here in Australia. I think a lot of the effort over the last 5 years, I would say 3 to 5 years, has really been in B2C brands. A lot of the capital that has come into the category has also gone into those companies. And that was needed. That was needed to develop a lot of different culinary concepts, different products, different form factors, start to understand and engage customers and what is it that they like, what is it that they want, how do we speak to those customers? Are they vegans, vegetarians? Are they flexitarians? Are they climatarians? These are all consumer-oriented problems that needed to be tackled. The challenge with that and the investment there is that it was more focused on the formulation, the manufacturing processes to work with the raw materials that existed, and the brand building, the marketing and the engagement with the consumer. All important things. But what happens when you're limited by the raw materials that you have access to? You can only go so far. If you cook, or anyone who's listening to this cooks at home, you know if you don't have fresh ingredients, if you don't have great ingredients, the product you're trying to make suffers. So in plant-based meat, what you'll see on the shelves today still, and really historically over the last 3 to 5 years, is mostly what we would call formed meats. These are products where you would take a protein, you would add to it a binding system. Now, this is called methylcellulose, which you may be familiar with, lots of people may be familiar with because this has been talked about a lot over the last year, as well as a fat system and flavoring systems. So you put all these things together to get it to hold together. That's because the texture and the product that is available in the protein has not been designed to an advanced state to do a better job in that product itself. We've created a product that you sampled here that will, full disclosure, that can be consumed without a methylcellulose binder. It's not needed. Now, that's the kind of innovation that takes place based on the business that we've set up and this part of the supply chain that we've focused on in developing and manufacturing ingredients. A food manufacturer and a food brand is not going to do that, but they can work with those ingredients to then advance the kinds of things they're putting out into the market.
Tell me, I'm familiar with gluten in mock meats or whatever label you might want to use in the product seitan, which has been around for hundreds of years and which is delicious, frankly speaking. Is this an inspiration for what you guys do, and do you perhaps consider yourselves a descendant of that product?
A descendant and inspiration is actually really interesting to think about. I think anytime you look at how food evolves and develops, we always look at where we've come from, right? And ideas are accretive. So I think absolutely, seitan is something that has been consumed probably predominantly in the vegan, vegetarian markets. I think it's a wonderful product that is widely consumed. It has a strong texture to it. However, if you're familiar with seitan and you've tried some of our products that we are making through our technology approach, the textures are different. What we're trying to do is go the next step, create a texture, a look, and a feel, all these complicated aspects that go into the mouthfeel and the taste experience of the consumer that really makes them feel like they're not leaving anything behind by walking away from animal proteins. Seitan isn't that. So it's a step forward, it is an evolution, but I think what we learned from seitan is that there is this special ability of gluten to be able to create textures that are quite desirable to our palates.
And we grow plenty of wheat here, and it's very good stuff. Why not?
Very abundant. Absolutely. And that's a part of the reason why we're doing this here in Australia. As a start, Australia actually has one of the most important gluten supplies in the world. It's one of really only 3 regions where gluten is developed, and it's a very important protein source for this category.
And so you have not very many ingredients, and one of your product has only 3 of them, and it's a point of difference next to companies that are using all sorts of things in their ingredients list, such as methylcellulose, as you mentioned earlier, and other hard to pronounce chemical compounds. Tell me about only using a few ingredients, how you're able to do this, and how this emerged as something you're doing differently.
It's actually not where we started. We started with products that were going to be used, and we still have them available, and actually they're widely of interest to food brands and manufacturers here in Australia that are used in making those formed meats where you add that methylcellulose to it to make a formed burger. It came out of and this is where food and development of anything is accretive over time. The more you do, the more ideas you get, the smarter you become. And so as we were connecting with the market, we did hear this from food manufacturers. We did hear this from one of our investors is Woolworths Venture Fund W23, so they track consumer trends and data quite widely as well. And we discovered over time that we had the opportunity to create this product through evolving our formulation, the way in which we bring things together, as well as our processing approach to be able to create these products. It's quite unusual, but I think it's actually part of the evolution where the category will go. If you think about formed meats, burgers, chicken nuggets, schnitzels, things like that, we all love those, and it's a big part of the market, whether it's animal protein or plant-based protein. but it's probably not your everyday meal. Because in your everyday meal, you want to eat something that feels a bit healthier, right? So you might have a stir fry. You might have a pasta with some protein added to it. You might have a salad with a protein added to it. So that's actually where we're trying to move into. And that needs to be a healthier version, not only from the meal itself and the secondary items that are going with that protein, but what that protein is made up of. So we're excited to see how we can help the category move into that everyday meal zone.
Some of the things that are informing your designing of products and approaches you're taking. You mentioned you're a flexitarian earlier. Does your personal diet have any bearing on what you're making here at Harvest Bee?
You know, every time you look at a category that's changing and evolving, it's really important to understand where is it today and where is it going. And when you look at the category over the last 5 to 10 years, it was really built by people who were absolute purists, idealists, and that was important. That was really important because I think they got the category off the ground. And they did it by connecting in a very purist, idealist fashion with consumers that were early adopters. However, this next phase, where we need to move the category of complementary proteins into mainstream adoption, we have to make sure that we do two things. We cannot speak with judgment or shame about behaviors that people have of consuming animal proteins. I do consume animal proteins. I grew up, my best friends were Black Angus cattle ranchers and hog farmers, and that's my hometown. That's the people that I know that are a part of my roots. And it tastes good. Animal meat tastes good. So I don't have any business or desire to shame people, and I don't think it's going away either. I think it will actually continue to grow, but I simultaneously think that we have to have complementary proteins to meet the future needs of population growth and a sustainable food system. So we have to speak with a different tone. We have to connect and reach out to the mainstream who actually like and will continue to consume animal proteins. And perhaps even equally or more importantly, we have to understand why those products taste good and how we can bring that into our formulations. Because to change dietary habits, to get people to eat complementary proteins and reduce their animal meat consumption, we have to give them something that doesn't feel like they're sacrificing. They're not making a compromise on taste, and it's even cheaper. If we do that, we'll start to see some changes in dietary habits.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about was grumpy old men and mock meat. We had a rather unfortunate LinkedIn thread we were talking about earlier with some fairly, I guess, passionate comments, and they sort of seem to come from a certain subset of the population who just didn't see the value in what you're doing. What do you make of the resistance to products like yours, the comments, so many chemicals, why call it meat? People just feeling challenged by the fact that you're making something that people might buy and enjoy?
It's a good question. I think we should expand it from grumpy, what did you call it, grumpy?
I think I said grumpy old men.
Okay, let's expand it from grumpy old men. It's actually a broader tent than that particular category. I think it's actually consistent with what we see in politics today. I was talking a few minutes ago about the way in which the plant-based meat category was grown over the last 10 years. It was grown through purists and idealists, and it was grown through a bit of shaming and judgment on certain lifestyle habits, namely eating animal proteins. That is a very ineffective way for driving the habits that people like this have. If you wanted to build that early adopter category, it's actually quite effective, right? Because it creates a tribe of people who feel like they're in a movement and they're creating the kind of change we needed to get this off the ground. But as we move forward, we have to think about how we're engaging and communicating with people like that, who see this as a tribal issue, who see this as something that is an us versus them. And are being told that their habits and their heritage, right? They might have a family of livestock farmers. They might be a livestock farmer themselves. And if we have conversations where we say we want to end livestock production, that's a way of living. That's a way of life. It's a heritage for people like that. We can't shame a way of life that's a means of earning income, a family property, or even dietary habits that we really love. The way that we'll change people's habits and will bring them into the tent eventually is by creating products that taste great and are cheaper. Even if you look at Tesla. Tesla started, it was a very, very expensive electric vehicle, right? Over time, Elon Musk's strategy was, I'm going to bring that cost down and down and down and down. And now, and electric vehicles are fairly political as well, not so dissimilar from plant-based meat, in that this is a left versus right type of conversation. Well, they're cars and they're food. But guess what? Now there's a Ford F-150 that's an electric vehicle, because the technology has become cheap enough that the performance of the vehicles is good and the cost of the vehicles are becoming less. So that's when people change. And even though that person that you just described, who perhaps might be a bit grumpy about plant-based meat, I bet was grumpy about Elon Musk's Tesla. But today, if they could buy a Ford F-150, they might do it. So I think that's the way that change takes place that is good for the environment. It's not through a judgmental way. It's bringing great technologies at a more affordable price for everyday living. And it's coming to market through a wide variety of different brands that consumers can connect with, not conflict with.
Right, so you have something brand new to the world. You might talk in a way that's a little radical, but as the category matures, your language should probably mature as well.
Perhaps so.
And so it's probably not the freshest, almost interesting question in the world, but your answer is of interest. Tell me about your plans for the near term and where you see the company in 5 years.
So the near term is easy. Our factory is open now, so we are very keen to work with people here in Australia, and in particular, we're developing some really good relationships in Southeast Asia as well. We want to work with the market and understand what their needs are, how our existing product range can serve them, and how we can continue to evolve what we're offering to meet market needs. We're very excited to do that and work with people who are ready to take risks and ready to evolve what it is that they're doing to meet those consumer demands and to continue to bring that price point down so that their revenues can grow. Because ultimately, that's what we have to do to create sustainable businesses as well. So we'll continue to do that. We actually are working today in what you might call vegan meat or plant-based meat. We were talking earlier about what's the name that will stick on this category. We've started to get a lot of inbound requests on vegan pet food, which was not something that we actually set out to do. But I think this is part of being a startup where we're agile and we're nimble and we like to work with what the market needs. And if you look at pet food, there's a pretty significant amount of the category that is going out to market every day, and it's 100% animal protein. So, and much of it is human grade. So it's really just another category where the buyers and the consumers are demanding we be more climate friendly. So they want an alternative, not a replacement, but a complementary offering that they consider bringing into their pet's diet. So we'll continue to expand our offerings. We'll do it with the market. We really want to be market-led, market-driven, based on what our customers need, and find ways to innovate and give them that opportunity to take it to market. So we'll continue to build our production here. We're also engaged with a number of strategic partners who are very interested in what it is that we're doing. And in 5 years' time, we will have identified groups that exist in different regional areas. I think in time, this category, alternative proteins, will be localized to create more sustainability, lower cost, fewer food miles, less carbon emissions, which requires us to be highly flexible with the different kinds of proteins we use and the kinds of textures we create that are suitable to that regional palate. So we're very interested in working with people who know they want to bring this to their market, who understand the market, who understand the textures, who understand the distribution channels to be successful, and start developing those kind of relationships so that we'll be able to replicate what we're doing here, not just in Australia with Australian and wheat, but to be able to take our technology and transfer it into other locations around the world with different types of proteins.
Lastly, a question for this series I'm going to ask everyone, yourself included, is there an issue within manufacturing that's not getting sufficient coverage and attention at the moment?
I think there has actually been a really wonderful amount of coverage post-pandemic, maybe even during pandemic and post-pandemic, if you can call it that, about why Australia actually needs to onshore manufacturing. And it would be no surprise to anybody who's in manufacturing or needs to purchase things from manufacturers, which is almost everybody, that it was very, very difficult to have supply chain security. It was also very difficult to manage costs when you had freight costs that were going through the roof, you've got currency volatility. So I actually think there is a restructuring of the global order that's happening right now of everything that happened post-World War II, where we started to push into globalization, created this highly complex supply chain environment, and that's being unbundled a bit and restructured. So there's been a lot of conversations in Australia because I believe the government, the former government, the current government have both acknowledged this. They recognize the security risk that we have here in Australia across a number of different levels, food security being one of them, but just being able to make sure that in the next pandemic, which we all expect will happen, we've still got products on the shelves that we can continue operations going. So there's been a lot of incentives, a lot of grants that the government has created to support onshoring or expansion of manufacturing, thinking about how we can push into regional areas to create greater complexity in the economy. There's been a lot of discussion around that, and I think there's been a lot of conversation, which has been really positive for the manufacturing industry. I think probably where we could do more is in some of the things that we've been talking about, is how do we do that in advanced manufacturing areas? How do we use technology? What is innovation in manufacturing? What is it that we're doing here? What is it that we're not doing, and why aren't we doing that? And how do we create the ecosystem that really fuels that kind of innovation and investment in manufacturing here in Australia? That's the conversation I'd like to have more of.
Well, we'll do our best to carry that forward. Kristi, thanks very much for joining us on AU Manufacturing Conversations. A pleasure to speak to you.
Thanks for the discussion.